Ever feel like your 20s are just kind of this weird in-between time?
Mhm.
Like you're supposed to be an adult, but like everyone's still low-key figuring things out.
Right.
We're diving into Meg Jay's The 20-something Treatment to like really unpack that feeling and figure out how to make this decade actually count.
Yeah, because what we don't always hear is that our 20s aren't just like a waiting room for life to start.
Right.
It's actually a time of huge brain development.
Oh, really?
Yeah, super important time to build like the foundation for everything else.
Okay, so less find yourself, more like build yourself during these years.
Exactly.
I like that. One thing I thought was really interesting was how Meg Jay talks about this thing called identity capital.
hmm
What even is that, and why does it matter so much when we're in our 20s?
So think of it kind of like all the skills you pick up,
Okay.
your experiences, even your little quirks, all the things that make you you.
Yeah.
Every choice you make, like whether it's volunteering or even just like learning how to bake sourdough bread,
Right.
it all adds to this identity capital.
Interesting.
And it's not even just about, making your resume look good.
Yeah.
It's about actually shaping who you are.
So like that photography class I took a couple years ago, that's not just a hobby.
Right.
It's like I was investing in like being a more well-rounded person,
Exactly.
which, hey, maybe down the line that'll open some doors too.
Exactly. And Meg Jay actually talks about how even like those jobs that seem kind of mundane,
Yeah.
they can be huge for growth in your 20s.
Really? See, I always thought work was mostly about, paying the bills,
Yeah.
not so much about like personal development.
It makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But think about all the structure you get from a job.
Yeah.
You've got deadlines.
Mm.
You have to work with other people.
Right.
You got to navigate like the whole office dynamic.
It's true.
And all of that pushes you out of your comfort zone.
It does. It really does.
It makes you more adaptable. You're more resilient.
Totally.
And those are such valuable traits no matter what you end up doing.
It's like boot camp, but for adulthood.
Exactly.
Speaking of challenges, can we talk about uncertainty?
Oh, for sure.
Because that's like the soundtrack to your 20s, right?
It really is.
Am I on the right career path? Should I be with this
Yeah.
person? It's constant second guessing.
Yeah. And Meg Jay actually gets into the science behind all of that.
Oh, interesting.
So our brains, especially this part called the amygdala, it's like our fear detector. It's on high alert during our 20s.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's constantly looking for threats, which can totally make us more anxious and doubtful.
And we're also living in this world where we're just surrounded by information.
All the time.
Everyone's always posting their highlight reel.
Totally.
It's so easy to fall into that trap of comparing yourself and feeling like you're not enough.
And that's where this thing called the liking gap comes in.
The liking gap.
Meg Jay talks about it as this like sneaky social media trap.
Okay.
We underestimate how much other people actually like us. We assume everyone's more popular, more successful, just, liked.
Just based on what they're showing online?
Exactly. But we have to remember, it's just a snapshot, not the whole story.
It's like judging a book by its cover. Right?
Really?
And forgetting that everyone has chapters they aren't posting about.
Right.
So if our brains are basically wired for these worst-case scenarios, how do we deal with that uncertainty?
So Meg Jay, she uses this really simple but powerful technique with her clients.
What's that?
It's called normalizing.
Okay.
Basically, you acknowledge those uncomfortable feelings, but without judging yourself. So instead of beating yourself up for feeling anxious, you just say, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now. And that makes sense given what's going on.
So you're treating yourself with the same kindness you'd give to a friend.
Exactly.
Just going through a rough time. Instead of adding fuel to the fire with all the what ifs, you're just like making space to accept it.
Exactly. And to deal with those spiraling thoughts, there's this other technique Meg Jay talks about. It's called the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding technique.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. It's like a reset button for your brain.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So first, just take a second to look around you and name 5 things that you can see.
Okay.
Then you switch to your body and find 4 things that you can feel.
Right, so you're going through each sense.
Exactly. Then you do 3 things you can hear,
Okay.
2 things you can smell, and finally, 1 thing you can taste.
So it brings you right into the present moment.
Exactly. It grounds you in the here and now.
And that's so powerful, right? Just like a simple thing like that can quiet the anxiety.
Totally.
But what about the anxiety that comes from like comparing ourselves to other people, especially with social media?
Yeah.
How do we like escape that need for validation and build actual genuine connections.
Yeah. Well, Meg Jay makes this really interesting comparison. She says social media is kind of like an evolutionary trap.
What do you mean?
Okay, so imagine baby sea turtles.
Okay.
They're hardwired to follow the brightest light. And in the past, that would have been the moon reflecting on the ocean.
Guiding them to safety.
Exactly. But now, with all the houses on the beach,
Yeah.
a lot of times, those baby turtles follow porch lights instead,
Oh, no.
which leads them away from the ocean, and it's really dangerous for them.
That's so sad.
It is. But it's a good example of how our instincts can be misdirected in the modern world.
So you're saying that our brains are wired for connection,
Yes.
but social media, with all its like perfectly curated lives,
Right.
it can actually make us feel more alone.
Totally. And one of the best ways to counteract that is actually something we don't talk about enough.
What's that?
Real-life friendships.
Yeah, easier said than done though, right?
I know.
Making friends as a grown-up is like next level awkward sometimes.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
can be.
Where do you even start?
Meg Jay talks about how friendships are our first experience with what she calls voluntary interdependence.
Interesting.
So unlike family, where you're kind of stuck with each other,
Right.
with friends, we choose them.
That's true.
We choose to put in the effort to build those relationships.
And it's that choice, that effort, that really deepens the connection.
Exactly.
So how do we actually build those friendships as adults, especially when it feels like everyone already has their group?
It's about being proactive.
Okay.
Instead of waiting for an invitation, be the one to send it. Plan a game night.
Yeah.
Ask someone to go on a hike. Grab coffee.
Flip the script.
Exactly.
Don't wait around wondering if people want to hang out. Just be the one to make it happen.
Yes. And, Meg Jay points out that a lot of people in their 20s, even if they seem like they have it all together,
Right.
they want those connections too.
That's reassuring.
It's in those shared moments, the times when we're vulnerable and support each other, that we build that identity capital.
It's not about just adding another name to your phone.
Right.
It's about investing in relationships that help us grow.
Exactly.
It's funny, we spend so much time in our 20s thinking about our careers, our finances,
Yeah,
but we don't always put the same effort into like building our friendships.
that's so true. And those friendships become even more important when you're trying to figure out, like, the whole romantic relationship thing,
Yes.
which can be a lot in your 20s.
Tell me about it. And then you throw in dating apps on top of everything else.
Oh yeah, a whole other layer.
It's like you're constantly swiping left on like potential connections.
Right.
One thing I found really interesting in Meg Jay's book was how she talks about like how accessible porn is these days and
Yeah.
how that can actually affect the way we experience intimacy in real life.
Some people don't talk about it a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of taboo.
But it's such an important topic, especially because, young people today have access to so much porn online. Meg Jay talks about all this research that shows how watching a lot of porn can really mess with your expectations.
Interesting.
And it can even lead to, like, performance anxiety.
It's like comparing yourself to an Olympian after watching the Olympics on TV, right?
Exactly.
Totally unrealistic.
Real life is messy. It's vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's about connecting with another person, not some perfectly choreographed performance.
So how do we like balance those two things?
That's the question, right?
Because you have this very hypersexualized online world, and then you have the like complexities of real life intimacy.
Yeah. Meg Jay talks about the importance of what she calls graduated intimacy.
Okay, I like that.
It's about intentionally building that foundation of emotional connection and trust before rushing into the physical stuff.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like you can't build a house without a strong foundation first, right?
Exactly.
It's not about withholding. It's about being intentional so like actual intimacy can grow.
Yes. And that idea that you need the right dosage of something, it applies to other areas of life too, not just relationships.
Okay, how so?
Well, Meg Jay talks about being aware of how much you're consuming, like alcohol or even caffeine.
Yeah.
Or how much time you spend on social media.
Right.
And like noticing how those things actually make you feel.
So it's all about finding that balance.
Exactly.
Knowing when something tips over from being enjoyable to like, maybe I'm overdoing this or this is actually making me feel worse.
It's about being honest with yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes we use these things to avoid dealing with tougher emotions.
Totally. It's like that saying, everything in moderation, including moderation.
I love that.
Sometimes you need to push your boundaries, but sometimes you just need to take a step back.
It's about taking care of yourself.
Exactly. Which, speaking of, Meg Jay talks about something that a lot of people forget about, especially when they're feeling stressed.
And what's that?
Moving your body.
Yes.
Getting some exercise.
It's so important.
You know I'm all about that.
I know you are.
But I'm curious, besides those good endorphins, like what's actually happening in our brains when we exercise?
Well, the research is amazing.
Oh, tell me.
Even moderate exercise, like going for a walk
Yeah.
or taking a dance class,
Mm-hmm.
it can be just as effective as therapy or medication for some people with things like anxiety and depression.
Wow, really? I knew it was good for you, but I didn't realize it was that powerful.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Wow.
And it's not just like people saying it makes them feel better. It's science.
Yeah, what's actually going on in there?
Well, when you're active, your brain is releasing all these mood-boosting chemicals like dopamine and serotonin.
Okay.
It also helps regulate your body's stress response system,
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
and it can even make you sleep better.
So it's like hitting the reset button for your mind and body.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be some crazy workout either.
Right.
Meg Jay actually tells this story about one of her clients who found that just cooking was enough to really help with their anxiety.
I love that. It's not always about, those picture-perfect self-care routines you see online.
Totally.
It's just about finding something that makes you feel good,
Exactly.
grounded, and like you've accomplished something.
Find what works for you and do it regularly.
Okay, so we've talked about work, we've talked about relationships, managing all the uncertainty, making time for ourselves, but there's another big one that comes up a lot in your 20s.
What's that?
Figuring out your purpose.
Right. The whole what am I supposed to do with my life thing?
Yes.
Meg Jay actually calls it purpose anxiety.
Purpose anxiety. I like that. It's very fitting.
Right.
It really is.
We feel like we have to find this one big thing, this calling that will make our life meaningful.
It's like we're all on this scavenger hunt with no map,
Exactly.
and everyone's expecting us to find the treasure.
So much pressure.
I know. And that's where I think Meg Jay has a really good point. She says that instead of looking for that one big purpose, we should focus on just having the different things in our lives that feel meaningful.
I love that.
Right.
So it's less about waiting for that aha moment
Yeah.
and more about actively trying things, seeing what feels right.
And those things might change as we get older too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What you love at 22 might be totally different when you're 28 or 35.
That takes the pressure off a bit, doesn't it?
For sure.
But okay, how do we even start to figure out what those things are, the things that give us meaning?
Well, Meg Jay says one of the best ways is just to get involved.
Okay.
Volunteer, try new things, connect with your community. It's often by doing things, by actually taking action, that we stumble upon our passions.
It's like that saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Yes.
We don't have to have it all figured out to just take that first step
Exactly.
and be open to where it leads us.
And through those experiences, you learn so much about yourself.
You do. You really do.
You find your strengths, especially in those tough moments when things are uncertain.
This has been so helpful, but I do have one more question. What about those times when the uncertainty feels really overwhelming?
Yeah.
Like when we're dealing with big emotions or when life throws something at us that we just didn't see coming?
Well, Meg Jay talks about the power of asking for help.
It's true. It's so easy to see that as a weakness.
Right.
But it's actually incredibly brave to say, I need some help.
It takes a lot of strength to admit that.
And especially now, with so much self-diagnosis happening online,
Oh, yeah.
it's even more important to talk to an actual professional.
Yes. They can give you accurate information and figure out what kind of support you need.
It's easy to go down those internet rabbit holes,
So sure.
but Dr. Google can't compare to actually talking to someone face to face.
Absolutely. And sometimes, the biggest changes, they come from the smallest things.
It's true. Sometimes we think we need this big, dramatic solution.
Right.
But a lot of times, just making small changes in our lives can make a really big difference.
Yeah, Meg Jay has this whole thing about taking action without knowing.
What's that?
It's basically like getting comfortable with the fact that you don't have all the answers.
Okay.
And just taking those little steps forward anyway.
So it's less about having the perfect plan.
Right.
And more about just starting to do something.
Exactly. Just get moving.
I love that.
And here's a really cool thing that Meg Jay talks about.
What's that?
Life actually tends to get better as we get older.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
So all this uncertainty and stress we feel in our 20s,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't last forever.
Nope. Studies show that we actually get happier as we age.
No way.
Yeah, it's not that things magically get easier, but our priorities change.
Okay, that makes sense.
We start to focus more on relationships,
Mm-hmm.
meaningful work, personal growth, all the stuff that actually makes us feel fulfilled.
So it's like we get better at tuning out all the distractions and figuring out what actually makes us happy.
Exactly. And those tough things we went through in our 20s.
Yeah.
All the heartbreaks, the job setbacks, the uncertainty.
You don't seem so bad anymore.
They become part of our story.
Yeah.
They show us how resilient we are, all the things we learned along the way.
I love that. So instead of looking back and wishing things were different, we can look at it like those were all important steps that got us to where we are now.
Exactly.
I like that.
And Meg Jay says we should take that same approach into the future.
What do you mean?
Like, be open to new experiences. Be kind to yourself when things are hard.
So uncertainty isn't something to be afraid of.
Right.
It's actually like the beginning of something new.
Exactly. And remember, you are not alone in this.
It's easy to feel that way sometimes.
I know, but Meg Jay talks about how most people in their 20s are going through the same stuff.
Even if their Instagram doesn't show it.
Exactly. We're all just figuring it out as we go.
That's comforting to hear.
Yeah.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into the 20-something treatment, what's like the main thing you want our listeners to take away from it?
I think the biggest thing is your 20s are a really special time.
Okay.
They're not just a waiting period before your real life begins.
It's about time we start seeing it that way.
I know, right?
Embrace everything, the ups, the downs, all the growth that happens during these years.
Yes. Be present, put yourself out there, and be kind to yourself.
It's okay to not have it all figured out.
Never feel bad about asking for help if you need it.
And remember, things usually have a way of working themselves out in the end.
Absolutely.
Embrace the unknown, stay curious, and keep moving forward.
Like Rebecca Solnit said, to be hopeful means to be uncertain about the future, to be tender towards possibilities, to be dedicated to change all the way down to the bottom of your heart.
I love that. And on that note, we'll leave you all to keep exploring, growing, and diving deep into this thing we call life.
Yes.
Until next time.